In the early hours of March 6, 1943, the sea around the Solomon Islands was swallowed by darkness. Moving silently through the mist, Task Force 68 advanced in perfect formation. 3 light cruisers and 3 destroyers gliding like shadows toward an unseen enemy. On the USS Montpelier, radar operators leaned over glowing screens, watching faint pulses dance across the glass. 2 fast-moving blips appeared off the starboard bow. For the first time in naval history, men could see through the night. Moments earlier, the task force had slipped past Kolombangara's southern shore, engines throttled low, guns loaded, and radios silent. Somewhere in the black void ahead, Japanese destroyers were also moving, unaware that the Americans now possessed a weapon far beyond human eyesight. Their mission was clear: strike the Japanese base at Vila, cripple its operations, and control the supply artery that fed Japan's front lines across the Solomon chain. But before they reached their target, 2 returning Japanese destroyers, Murasame and Minegumo, would stumble into their path, setting the stage for a short, brutal clash that would prove how radar could transform night into daylight. By early 1943, the once mighty Imperial Japanese Navy was no longer the hunter, it was the hunted. The 6 brutal months at Guadalcanal had drained Japan's finest: warships, aircraft, and the veteran crews who once ruled the Pacific nights. The defeat shattered Tokyo's dream of advancing toward Australia. Now their strategy reversed, no longer to expand, but to survive. Retreating northward, Japan rushed to fortify a new defensive line through the Solomon Islands. Key outposts like Kolombangara, New Georgia, and Rabaul became anchors in a desperate attempt to slow the Allied advance. Yet even in retreat, Japanese destroyers still prowled the darkness. Their speed, elite lookouts, and deadly Type 93 long lance torpedoes kept them dangerous, especially at night when radar was still rare. For the U.S. Navy, Guadalcanal had been a costly teacher. Dozens of ships lost, countless sailors dead, but lessons burned deep. They now understood that the Pacific War would not be won by daylight battles alone. The fight for control would come in narrow channels and black waters, where technology, not numbers, would decide who ruled the night. Between the jungle-clad islands of Kolombangara and Arendelle, a narrow waterway twisted like a dark vein through the heart of the Solomons. This was Blackett Strait, a treacherous corridor of reefs, mist, and silence that had become vital to the Japanese war machine. Every night, under the cloak of darkness, destroyers and barges of the infamous Tokyo Express raced through these waters, carrying supplies, ammunition, and reinforcements to isolated garrisons. For Japan, this wasn't just a route, it was survival itself. Even after their retreat from Guadalcanal, the Imperial Navy clung to these lifelines with relentless determination. Their high-speed destroyers hugged coastlines, darting between reefs and coves to evade Allied aircraft. Each mission was a gamble. One misstep, one wrong current, and an entire crew could vanish into the reefs. Yet they kept coming, night after night. For the United States Navy, cutting off that lifeline wasn't just tactical, it was essential. The next Allied objective, New Georgia, stood at the center of the Solomon chain. Its airfield at Munda Point could decide the fate of the entire campaign.
Make the adjustment.
If Japan continued to reinforce Kolombangara and Vila, they could turn New Georgia into a fortress and stall the Allied advance toward Rabaul, the Empire's last great bastion in the South Pacific. The long, bloody nights of 1942 had taught the U.S. Navy a bitter truth. Bravery alone could not win battles fought in the dark. At Savo Island and Tassafaronga, superior American firepower had failed because their gunners were blind. Japanese destroyers, faster and trained to strike by instinct, slipped through the night unseen, unleashing their deadly long lance torpedoes with devastating precision. But by early 1943, everything was about to change. In late 1942, a new weapon entered the fleet, the SG radar, a 10-centimeter surface search system that could detect destroyer-sized targets over 10 miles away, even through rain or total darkness. For the first time, American warships could track enemies long before visual contact. It was a silent revolution, one that would erase Japan's most potent advantage, mastery of the night. Admiral William F. Halsey, commander of the South Pacific area, understood what this meant. He had watched proud ships sink into the black waters of Guadalcanal because of confusion and outdated tactics. Now he vowed never again.
We need orders.
Technology would not simply aid his men, it would guide them. Under his command, training shifted toward radar discipline, gunnery synchronization, and night coordination. Destroyer raids were no longer just missions. They became experiments, living laboratories to perfect the art of electronic warfare. Amid this transformation rose Rear Admiral Aaron S. Merrill, a quiet but methodical tactician. His task force, 3 Cleveland-class cruisers and 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, embodied the new doctrine: strike with precision, trust the instruments, and never close the distance unless radar confirmed the kill. Merrill's crews drilled relentlessly, learning to fight blind, but think clear. Every bearing, every distance, every movement was plotted, refined, and executed under radar guidance. By early 1943, the United States Navy was no longer the uncertain force that had stumbled through the chaotic battles of the previous year. Under Admiral Halsey's command, a new generation of officers and sailors had emerged, men trained not only in courage, but in precision. At the heart of this evolution stood Rear Admiral Aaron S. Merrill, commander of Task Force 68, a quiet strategist whose calm composure masked a mind built for modern warfare. Merrill's force represented the cutting edge of naval innovation. 3 Cleveland-class light cruisers, USS Montpelier, USS Cleveland, and USS Denver, supported by 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, USS Waller, USS Connie, and USS Conway. The cruisers were newly built, armed with powerful 6-inch dual-purpose guns, advanced fire control radar, and well-drilled crews who had trained relentlessly for this very kind of operation. The destroyers, seasoned by earlier Solomon engagements, formed the task force's outer shield, swift, deadly, and capable of launching devastating torpedo attacks in moments. Merrill's doctrine was simple yet revolutionary. Trust the machines, not the moonlight. Rather than closing in for visual contact, a fatal habit that had doomed ships at Savo Island and Tassafaronga, his crews would track, identify, and engage targets entirely through radar. Fire-controlled data from the SG radar would be relayed to gunnery directors, where range and bearing were continuously refined in real time. The result was an orchestra of precision, where steel, circuitry, and human discipline fused into a single, deadly rhythm. As February drew to an end, intelligence reports revealed increasing Japanese barge traffic around Columbara. Reconnaissance aircraft spotted new construction at Vila, and coast watchers confirmed that the Japanese were expanding their supply base there. These signs left little doubt. The enemy was preparing for renewed resistance on New Georgia. Merrill's force would strike first. His mission? Cripple Vila, disrupt the supply chain, and, if fate allowed, destroy any Japanese warships encountered in the process. By late February, The quiet waters around Kolombangara were no longer still. Allied reconnaissance planes spotted strings of small barges creeping through the jungle-fringed coves, while coast watchers reported new piers, fuel drums, and barracks rising along the shoreline near Vila. The Japanese were turning this once minor outpost into a fortified supply base, one that could threaten the upcoming Allied assault on New Georgia. To Admiral William F. Halsey, the message was unmistakable: strike now, before the enemy could dig in. In early March, Rear Admiral Merrill received his orders. Task Force 68 would bombard Vila, destroy its supplies, and, if possible, intercept any Japanese ships caught in transit. The timing was critical. Reconnaissance suggested frequent destroyer runs through Blackett Strait. Merrill planned to strike during one of these Tokyo Express nights, hoping to annihilate both infrastructure and enemy warships in a single blow. To tighten the net, 2 U.S. submarines, USS Grampus and USS Grayback, were deployed near Kula Gulf, tasked with intercepting any Japanese vessels fleeing the strike. Both were experienced hunters of the Solomons, their periscopes slicing the black water like silent predators, but only one would return. In the days ahead, Grampus would vanish without a trace, possibly sunk by the very destroyers Merrill was about to meet. The night of March 5th, 1943, fell over the Solomon Islands like a shroud. Beneath the sky stripped of stars, Task Force 68 advanced silently into the slot, the long corridor of sea that had become the graveyard of so many ships. Engines were throttled low, radio silence absolute. Every man aboard knew this was hostile water, a place where the Japanese had once ruled the night. But tonight, that dominance would be tested by the unseen eyes of radar. Unbeknownst to Merrill, 2 Japanese destroyers, Murasame and Minegumo, had just completed a routine supply run to Vila. Laden with empty fuel drums and weary crews, they began their return journey northward through Blackett Strait. It was the shorter route, but also the deadliest. Narrow, reef-fringed, and now crawling with American warships they did not yet see. As the Americans slipped past Kolombangara's southern coast, radar screens aboard USS Montpelier began to whisper. At 0057, faint echoes appeared, first mistaken for the outline of Sasamboki Island, then splitting into 2 fast-moving signals. The operators froze. These were no land masses. Merrill's task force had found its prey. Contacts confirmed. Came the quiet report. The range, 11,000 yards and closing. Orders rippled through the formation. Gunnery directors aligned. Turrets elevated. Firing solutions refined through radar guidance. The ships held their silence. The sea held its breath. At 1:01 a.m., March 6, 1943, the silence shattered. Aboard USS Montpelier, Rear Admiral Aaron S. Merrill gave the order, commence firing. In perfect unison, 3 American cruisers, Montpelier, Cleveland, and Denver, unleashed their salvos into the darkness. Their 6-inch guns roared, and the night sky erupted into violent flashes of orange and white. For the first time in history, radar-directed gunnery turned total darkness into precision warfare. The first target, the Japanese destroyer Murasame, had no warning. Shells landed all around her in the opening seconds, water spouts towering on every side. Within moments, a direct hit tore through her superstructure. USS Waller, positioned on the flank, launched 5 torpedoes, one of which struck home. The explosion ripped Murasame apart. Fire and steam engulfed her decks as her fuel tanks ignited. Witnesses later said the blast was so powerful it was heard 25 miles away. In less than 15 minutes, she was gone, consumed by fire and swallowed by the sea. Nearby, the Minegumo, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Tokuno, saw the inferno and desperately maneuvered northeast to escape. Her crew fired blindly toward the flashes of American guns, but radar made such efforts hopeless. Merrill's cruisers shifted their targeting solutions within seconds. Shells fell in tight, merciless groups. At 0106, Minegumo's engines were destroyed, her decks ablaze, her crew scrambling to abandon ship. She may have fired torpedoes in return, but none found their mark. The entire engagement lasted less than a quarter of an hour. The Japanese destroyers, veterans of dozens of night operations, had been annihilated before they could even spot their attackers. The Americans, fighting blind, yet guided by radar clarity, suffered not a single hit. For Merrill's men, it was the first real proof that the lessons of Guadalcanal had been learned and mastered. At 1:14, with both targets destroyed, Merrill's task force regrouped. Crews stood ready for a possible counterattack, scanning for more Japanese ships, but none came. Instead, faint fires from Minegumo's wreckage burned over the black water like distant stars. About 174 Japanese sailors survived, swimming toward the coast of Columbangara, clinging to debris as the American fleet moved on toward its next phase, the Bombardment of Vila. In the silence that followed, the scale of what had happened began to sink in. Two frontline destroyers, elite instruments of Japan's once unrivaled night-fighting doctrine, had been wiped out without ever sighting their enemy. The age of visual warfare, the era of spotlights, flares, and instinct was over. The Battle of Blackett Strait had proven that in the Pacific, the night no longer belonged to Japan. It belonged to the cold green glow of American radar. At 1:24 a.m., with the sea around them burning and silent, Rear Admiral Merrill gave his next order: commence shore bombardment. The destruction of Murasame and Minegumo had cleared the path to the true objective, Vila, the Japanese supply hub on the southern tip of Columbangara. Task Force 68 shifted course northeast, forming a precise line-ahead formation. The dark coastline loomed 2 miles away, invisible to the naked eye, but outlined perfectly on radar screens, glowing in the dim red light of the command rooms. The bombardment began methodically. The USS Montpelier opened fire first, her 6-inch guns hurling high explosive shells into the jungle beyond the shoreline. Seconds later, Cleveland and Denver joined in, their barrages overlapping in thunderous precision. The night exploded into chaos. Flames blossomed inland as fuel depots and ammunition caches detonated one after another. Each cruiser had been assigned specific targets based on reconnaissance data. Montpelier aimed for supply dumps and barge piers. Cleveland struck suspected airfields and barracks, while Denver concentrated on troop staging areas and fuel storage. Overhead, a Black Cat patrol plane circled at medium altitude, its crew relaying corrections by radio, adjusting aim, confirming hits, and calling out secondary explosions that marked successful strikes. The Japanese defenders, stunned by the sudden assault, struggled to respond. Their shore batteries opened fire sporadically, flashes from their guns quickly pinpointed by radar and silenced by counter barrages. Within minutes, 2 known artillery positions were obliterated. Through the smoke, secondary explosions, fuel, ammunition, and possibly hidden supply barges sent plumes of fire hundreds of feet into the air. Vila was burning. By 1:40, 16 minutes after the first shell, the firing ceased. The air smelled of salt, oil, and burning wood. The jungle behind Vila glowed like a furnace, and columns of smoke drifted high into the night. Merrill's task force had expended a large portion of its ammunition. Every shell precisely accounted for, every impact confirmed. Satisfied with the results, Merrill ordered withdrawal. The cruisers accelerated to 30 knots, their wakes glowing faintly in the moonlight as they turned back toward the slot. The destroyers reformed their protective screen, scanning the dark water for submarines or returning Japanese ships. But the night remained quiet. Not a single American vessel had been hit. Vila's docks, depots, and defenses were left in ruins. At 1:45 a.m., the guns finally fell silent. Smoke hung low over Kolombangara's coast, glowing faintly from the fires of Vila. Task Force 68 reassembled in perfect order, the destroyers Waller, Cumney, and Conway sliding back into position to screen the cruiser's withdrawal. Engines rumbled to full power as the formation accelerated to 30 knots, heading south through the slot. Not a single Japanese shell had found its mark. On USS Montpelier's bridge, Admiral Merrill filed his after-action report for Admiral Halsey. 2 light cruisers destroyed, shore installations heavily damaged, and no American losses. Though the enemy ships were later confirmed to be the destroyers Murasame and Minegumo, the result remained the same. Japan had lost 2 veteran night raiders, and their base at Vila was in ruins. Only one American loss shadowed the triumph. The submarine USS Grampus, deployed north of Kula Gulf, had vanished during the operation, likely sunk by the very destroyers Merrill's force had just destroyed. Her crew never returned. When dawn finally broke over the Solomon Islands, the waters of Blackett Strait were littered with oil, debris, and the fading glow of fires still burning on the horizon. In less than 40 minutes, Task Force 68 had delivered one of the most decisive night victories of the Pacific War. 2 veteran Japanese destroyers, Murasame and Minegumo, were gone, their crews scattered across the waves. On the American side, not a single ship had been struck. It was a flawless triumph, born not of luck, but of technology, discipline, and evolution. For the U.S. Navy, this battle was more than a tactical victory. It was proof that radar had turned the tide of night warfare. Just months earlier, Japanese destroyers had ruled the darkness, striking unseen and vanishing into the night. Now it was the Americans who saw first, aimed first, and struck first. The age of instinct was giving way to the age of information. The Battle of Blackett Strait marked that turning point, the night when the Pacific War shifted irreversibly toward Allied dominance. For Japan, the implications were devastating. Their once legendary mastery of night combat had vanished in the green glow of American radar screens. Reports from Rabaul and Tokyo spoke not just of 2 lost destroyers, but of a fading doctrine, proof that the Empire's technological edge had eroded beyond recovery. Still, the strait remained dangerous, and the fight for the Solomons would continue. But from this night onward, the shadows no longer offered safety. Life lesson: see beyond the darkness. The story of Blackett Strait isn't just about ships and radar. It's about adaptation. The Americans learned from defeat, turned knowledge into strength, and dared to trust in something new when fear urged them to cling to the old. Life often mirrors that ocean, uncertain, dark, and filled with unseen dangers. But those who evolve, who learn from every failure and embrace new ways of seeing, will always find their course. When storms come, don't fear the night. Build your own radar. Let discipline be your compass, and let persistence light your way through the unknown. If this story moved you, if you believe history still holds lessons for the battles we fight today, leave a comment below. Tell us what your radar is in life. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover more untold moments that shaped our world.